With so much of culture today being looked at as the oppressor versus the oppressed, as a landlord, you're being considered the oppressor.
The power that these kinds of institutional landlords can exercise and have at their fingertips is way larger than any small landlord. Hey everybody, welcome back. We're here today joined again by our favorite guest, our CEO, Seamus Nally.
John, it never ceases to bug me a little bit, your sarcasm when you say the favorite guest.
You are our favorite guest. You're one of our only guests, but you're also our favorite guest, Seamus.
Well, it helps to be number one out of very, very few.
Aw, shucks. Yeah.
John, today we're going to talk about something that's important to our audience, which is why do people hate landlords? And to some extent, why do people, maybe you're sitting there at home thinking, yeah, why do people hate me just because I own a rental property? So we're going to dig into this, talk about what's led us to get here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think there's been a perception, we hear it from our audience all the time, hear from our users all the time, that something about today or the last several years of owning rental properties has made them feel alienated, I guess, in general, that they're viewed kind of as there's a landlord leeches, right? There's negative terms. And that's real because actually renter sentiment has changed about this. And there's reasons for that. The first is a consistent topic on the show, which is affordability of housing and rents going up. And at least in my commentary, the thing I always bring up is we don't have enough supply. And so affordability has been going up or going down, excuse me. I think there is a pretty clear stat here where half of all U.S. renter households are now cost burdened, meaning the cost of their rent is exceeds 33% of their take-home income. So that's a reality. It's way more than what Dave Ramsey says you should pay.
Yes. And part of the reason that the supply has been restricted for purchasing, it's because we're not building, right? But we've also had some new large players enter the market. So right after the financial crisis, 2008, large players like BlackRock started purchasing single family homes, right? So you had this new version of landlord, which is the institutional landlord. Not only were they buying up inventory, which was competing with potential individuals looking for a primary resident, but they were also managing these properties at an arm's reach, right?
Yeah.
And they were treating it like a hedge fund would, which means they were gamifying certain aspects like raising rent, right? They were turning property maintenance into a spreadsheet and managing it from that standpoint. And so not only did it bring new competition to some markets, specifically in the Sun Belt and down in Florida, where they were very active purchasing, but it brought in a much different feel as a renter, right? And what it was like to interact with your landlord, which at times was a very large either corporation or was just being outsourced to a property manager without the same quality control or hands-on approach that a DIY landlord would take.
Absolutely. And I think one thing implied in that answer, but maybe not super clear, is the power that these kinds of institutional landlords can exercise and have at their fingertips is way larger than any small landlord. They have entire law firms, right? And like waiting to kind of get tapped by local property managers for things like eviction proceedings, et cetera. And so these last ditch legal mechanisms like eviction were getting used. I would say those companies overused those and really played up their power difference with the individual renter in the unit.
Yeah, and it took the any human or personal aspect right out of the equation completely, and that definitely changes the experience as being a renter and whether or not this property that you're renting just feels like four walls or does it feel like a home. And that was amplified by a general movement over the last 10 years to view most situations from an oppressed to an oppressor dynamic. So as a landlord, what you have to understand with so much of culture today being looked at as the oppressor versus the oppressed, as a landlord, you're being considered the oppressor. No matter what your actual situation is, And whether you're operating that way or whether your financial situation is actually a lot more like the renter, right? You're trying to pay a mortgage. Maybe you're not cash flowing a property because expenses and insurances or property taxes have gone up. You're still looked at as the oppressor in the situation. And with that comes a very specific negative connotation and stigma. And you don't have to go very far to find examples of where that's being amplified, right?
Yeah.
You and I took a little stroll down some subreddits before now and looked at the different ways landlords are being portrayed, right? And while some of them were super comical, we actually had to do a couple of, take some deep breaths before walking into what is a serious topic because of how comical some of the content in the subreddit is. It is absolutely helping to spread this idea that landlords are leeches. They're taking advantage of the renters, right? They're not people as much. And that might be why you're sitting back saying, yeah, why am I hated? Or we talk to users all the time who say they're a landlord with a tinge of like embarrassment or shame, right? Because they're not sure how that sort of either title or how letting people know that's a way in which they are planning for their retirement will actually resonate with their audience, right? In a conversation, a networking event, things like that.
Exactly. I think, there's those things like the landlord special, I think is a meme format we can bring up here, where it's basically painting over stuff, right? Painting over light switches, painting over a fly is one memorable one. And I don't think you'd find people who are actually doing the turnover process themselves on their own property that they own are going to do something like that. That's the painter who's about 17 steps down the payment ladder from the skyscraper in New York, doing something with no quality control because there's not actual ownership in that thing. The term landlord, when you close your eyes and say landlord, right? Who do you imagine? And I say who because it's a person. And that's what's so frustrating, I think, about landlords like our users, who are people. But most of the criticisms are actually levied against faceless corporations at the end of the day. And so there's not an actual meaningful differentiation in conversation. Is it a landlord or is it this institutional landlord, this faceless suit kind of in my mind, or represented by my property manager who might be incompetent?
I go to a handful of conferences where you meet other landlords, property management companies. One of the interesting pieces of advice is that I hear, and I disagree with and don't do in my own with my own rentals, is to actually pretend you are not the owner of the property and you are actually a property management company when you are interacting with your tenants, with this idea that being at more of an arm's length, right, is a safer way to approach that relationship. I actually think the problem with that and why it's damaging is because it is what the renter expects.
Yeah.
They expect to be at arm's length to the person actually impacted by things. And so I think that human approach and actually being upfront and creating a connection with your tenants in the same way you would any customer, right? I'm not saying invite them over for dinner or anything like that, but treating them like a customer and letting them know that you appreciate their business, right? And their business is paying rent every month. I actually think that puts you on a much better ground for a relationship going forward that's built on respect and an understanding of the roles that each of you have to play. Renter is there to pay the rent, but then a landlord is there to also fulfill the lease, take care of any maintenance items that comes up, and largely be reactive to the needs that the tenant may have because they are the customer, right? And at the end of the day, they're in that property that you spent your hard-earned money on purchasing. And if they don't treat it well and you don't have a great relationship with them, your investment's not going to work out.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing worth underscoring is do not abandon what actually makes you different from the landlords that a renter may be already predisposed to dislike. Actually leaning to the differences. And that's the human piece of it. Interface with them as a human. And you'll go a lot further.
Yeah. And hopefully you'll buy a little bit of grace, and one tenant at a time, you'll start changing their opinion. I've had the good fortune of talking to a lot of landlords that have great tactics for how they create good relationships with their tenants. If you have a couple, please add them to the comments, help enrich the community and the rest of our audience. If you've appreciated the content that we're putting out here, don't forget to like and subscribe.